Have you guys heard about the story where a man puts insulation foam into his penis? Well, this story was actually published a couple years ago and it recently came out in the media. And I happen to be good friends with the author of the case report, Dr. Susan McDonald. She's going to let us know exactly what happened and what you need to know. If you're new here, I'm Dr. Rena Malik and we make urologic content about bladder health, sexual health, and so much more. Make sure you subscribe and share this channel with your friends. Susan, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Rena.
So this is such a crazy story, and I'm so honored to know you, and you're the one who wrote this case report. So tell me your memory of how this all went down.
Yes, in a memory it is fairly memorable. So I got a call from a colleague that a patient had come in who had inserted some spray foam into his urethra. And so in hearing the story in more detail, the patient was someone who instrumented his urethra for sexual gratification. And so in trying to amplify his erection and have a more pleasurable experience, had put the tiny little straw on the end of a spray foam can into his urethra. And inadvertently, their partner hit the button. And that filled their urinary tract with the spray foam. And then, as people often do, when something untoward happens during a sexual experience, they wait and hope that it will kind of resolve, and it did not. He was having significant trouble urinating. So I think approximately 3 days later, he came in and we got a CAT scan that showed a significant amount of spray foam in his bladder as well as his urethra.
Wow, that's so crazy. So they actually took the straw without the intention of using the spray foam. At least that's the way they told you.
Correct. Yes.
And so that wasn't the intention. The intention was just to sound with the actual straw.
With the straw, correct. But then inadvertently the spray foam was activated.
Got it. So I understand people do urethral sounding for pleasure, but does it also help them with their erectile function?
I would say only in so much as anyone has increased erections when something more pleasurable is occurring. It's not a traditional treatment for erectile dysfunction, but whatever anyone finds pleasurable is going to help them get an erection.
Yeah, so that's why, because all the articles that were posted about this. So for those of you who don't know, this article was actually published a couple years ago, and all of a sudden, a few weeks ago, it became big news in conventional media. And a lot of the headlines are like, this guy injected spray foam or insulation into his urethra to help his erectile dysfunction. Which when I read that, I was like, that's not really something that I've heard before. Mostly, it's always been for pleasure.
Yeah, I confess I was actually confused when I got wind that my case report had hit the media and the internet. And then the tagline was that man tries to treat erectile dysfunction with spray foam. And I had to go back and read my own article. And it was merely that he said he was having some trouble getting erections and he was trying to self-stimulate.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So this is not going to help people who are having trouble with getting erections. Do not recommend. Definitely do not recommend.
Yes. If you're having erectile dysfunction, please just see your friendly local sexual medicine urologist who can help you with some standard of care treatments.
Absolutely. And if you're wondering what those are, check out my videos on erectile dysfunction and medications for erectile dysfunction, and I'll link those in the description as well. So in the article, I actually have to look at the name of what you wrote because I'd never heard this terminology before, but it's polyembolocoilomania. What exactly is that?
That is the insertion of any kind of foreign object into one's urethra.
Okay. All right. So, this patient also, when you went to try and treat him, you found that he had stricture disease. So maybe let's take a step back. How do you normally treat someone who's got something stuck in their urethra? And then how did the stricture disease play into that?
So typically when people insert things into the urethra and something goes awry, it's because there's no flared base or larger end to it. So it gets lost in the urethra and travels either deeper in the urethra or into their bladder. Fortunately, most urologists were very skilled in endoscopic procedures. So that means like a very small camera goes through their urethra, deeper into the urethra or into the bladder. And then it's kind of like playing the claw game at the arcade, but without the sharp edges. We use something like a fishing net that goes in and then grabs it, and then we pull it back out. The difficult part about this case, and what really motivated me to write the case report, was the quantity of material within their urinary tract. So the entire bladder was filled with, if you imagine like the head of a cauliflower, that amount of material, and the pictures are in the case report that demonstrate that. And then the urethra, we tried to take the endoscopic instruments and basket from the urethra out in both directions, from the bladder after we opened it and from the urethra as well. But that just wasn't possible because the patient had stricture disease, which is narrow places in their urethra. And so it was kind of like multiple hourglass type shapes. And so they had made an internal cast of their urethra, and you couldn't grab the pieces because they were anchored by the narrow portion. So we had to surgically incise a good portion of the urethra to get all those pieces out. It was quite challenging.
Yeah, that does not sound fun. And people can get strictures for all sorts of reasons. So you can get strictures because you were born with them. You can get them from having sexually transmitted infections, and most commonly trauma. And in this case, I would presume that the patient was probably sounding for years or for some time before they came in, and that's probably where they developed the stricture disease.
Yeah, absolutely, Rena. So they had instrumented their urethra quite a bit before, and with any kind of sharp edges or object that causes trauma, it causes scar tissue. And unfortunately, in a tube, scar tissue just makes the lumen more narrow. So that's what we mean when we talk about stricture disease.
Yeah, and so if you think you might have a stricture, you might notice that you're having difficulty emptying your bladder, you're straining to empty, or even you're having some more urgency or frequency. So if you're having those symptoms, make sure you go get checked out. It could be a stricture, it could be something else, but make sure you come and get that checked out and don't delay.
Yeah, and Rita, I'd just like to add to that, one of the funnier presentations, one of my patients with strictures told me he went to a sporting event with his family member, and they were side by side at the urinal, and he took about 4 times as long to urinate. And then his family member said, "What's up with that?" And that's how he actually came to the urologist and got diagnosed with the strictures. He had a weak stream, and it was just taking him a really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very common presentation where it just takes forever or it takes a long time to start the stream. And I actually, I think a couple years ago, reacted to a TV show where they really depicted this well. So I'll link that as well up here and you can check it out. So what are some of the craziest things that you've seen people put in their urethra?
I think it's fair to say that household implements in general get inserted in the heat of the moment. Writing objects, crayons, pens, pencils seem to be popular. Things that are cylindrically shaped, so like paint brushes. I saw the little beaded keychain, the metal balls get inserted one time. So those are some popular items.
Yeah, I had one patient with a toothbrush that got stuck, and then instead of coming to the ER, they broke off the toothbrush, and then there was a piece of toothbrush actually like stuck in their bladder and urethra. And then I've heard of people using, those little magnetic buckyballs, which get stuck. And then what happened is they got stuck and coiled in the bladder. And so you couldn't remove them because they're all magnetically stuck to each other. So that's also a very challenging and difficult thing. And again, do not recommend.
Correct. Yeah, they do make things to safely put in your urethra. And step one on that would be something that you're not going to lose. So actually, after this incident, I had looked up some things, and on websites, they make sounds with flared bases, just like they make, they make sex toys for anuses and such so that you don't lose them. And so it just has a wider base so that you can insert and then it won't drop in.
Yeah, exactly. And if you can buy surgical grade urethral sounds. You can find those online, and those are great too because they're meant to not get lost as well. What are some other safe practices that you'd recommend for people if they are wanting to urethral sound and need some advice?
So I think sterility is key because urethral sounding can lead to infections. Lubrication, as always in both our sports, is key. Lubrication is your friend. I think gravity is also your friend. You do not want to push. If you're going to put things in your urethra, just kind of let them fall in gently. If you get any resistance whatsoever, stop what you're doing. You can cause a significant amount of bleeding, trauma, and scarring. I also think, just for my 2 cents, as someone who fixes urethras for a living, I know that the medical grade sounds, the metal sounds are available, but I would use something like either a self-lubricated catheter that you could get from a supply store, Or if that's not quite sexy enough, maybe consider some of the sex toy shops have silicone sort of tubes that you can put in because they're less rigid. So I feel like you're less likely to hit the walls and sort of cause trauma.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would also add that, when you're using lubricant, the lubricant itself can get unsterile because it can get bacteria inside. So I tell people use kind of the single serve lubricants, like the small packets, and throw it away when you're done. Make sure your hands are clean. Make sure the sound is clean. And while we don't recommend people doing urethral sounding, we realize people are going to do it and they enjoy it. And so we're going to give you this advice so that hopefully it helps you if you fall into that camp.
Yeah, generally speaking, I wouldn't recommend it, but people are going to do what they find pleasurable. So if you're going to do it, we just want to provide some recommendations so you can do it safely.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. McDonald. Is there anything else you want our viewers to know?
No, I think that about covers it, Dr. Malik. Thank you so much for having me.